here. Welcome to our spaceship here in the city of Vista. I am so thankful we can all be here. Really appreciate the meeting. First, we're going to start with, excuse me, I'm grabbing my notes. Thank you. All right, first we're going to call to order and then we'll have a roll call. Thank you.
Alternate Board Member Blackburn. Board Member Figueroa. Board Member Becker.
Present.
Vice Chair Garcia.
Here.
Chair Melendez.
Here.
And I will note Board Member Nunez is absent.
Thank you. Now please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Again, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now we'll move into board announcements. Again, I want to say thank you for joining us here today. And also just want to highlight the opening of our new parking structures. We have some solar installation that we were able to accomplish with the support of our assembly member. And we're really excited to provide that renewable energy and a little bit of shade in the parking lot, and provides a little bit more parking for everybody to be here today. Do we have any other board comments or announcements? I'd love to hear from all of our cities if anyone has anything to share. We doing good? Okay. Now we'll move over to public comments. Do we have any public comment at this time?
We do not have any non-agenda public speakers.
All right, moving on to approval of the minutes that was in our packet. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. A motion is second. Go ahead and vote to approve the minutes.
Alternate Board Member Blackburn. Board Member Figueroa. Board Member Becker.
Approve.
Vice Chair Garcia.
Yes.
Chair Melendez.
Aye. Thank you. That is approved. And now we will go into approval of the consent calendar. And just on here, I would say that these are typical business items. A lot have been approved before. We have the treasurer's report, as well as the memorandum of understanding for the CEC, Southern California Equitable Building Decarbonization Direct Install Program. So I'll go ahead and have a motion to approve the consent calendar, please.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, sir. And with a motion and a second, I will ask for the vote.
Alternate Board Member Blackburn. Board Member Figueroa. Board Member Becker.
Yes.
Vice Chair Garcia.
Yes.
Chair Melendez.
Thank you. Now we're going to move into reports. So we will hear from Greg Wade, our CEO.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Clean Energy Alliance. Sorry, I was just going to say thank you for having us in Vista. It's nice to have a different surroundings. Yeah, I'm used to looking up at you guys.
We're a little rearranged today.
And without further ado, I'll just jump into the CEO report. So this is just an update on our most recent expansion and enrollment of the cities of Oceanside and Vista. As you can see here, we're now up to a total of 113,456 customer accounts with 5,939 opt-outs for a participation rate of almost 95%. Here we have the enrollment statistics for all our member agencies. That default product of 75% carbon free, we see that that's the highest enrolled, obviously, for our member agencies at almost 250,000. Clean impact, the 50% at 705, and the green impact, 100% renewable at 980 accounts. As was just mentioned, there is an MOU that was just approved with Los Angeles County, who's the lead agency on our Equitable Building Decarbonization Direct Install Program. And this is to accelerate large-scale residential building decarbonization programs. As a reminder, this Southern California Coalition was granted $329 million for 6 Southern California counties. $1.3 million is budgeted for San Diego County partners, including CEA. And this does not include our implementers or projects budgets. CEA will assist with program marketing, with program design and support, community education and training, and participant recruitment. I wanted to underscore that this is a voluntary program. This is not a mandatory program, and it is intended to reach hard-to-reach communities in our service area. We are also preparing a CNI, commercial and industrial. There's another acronym you'll hear often. Solar generation plus battery storage behind the meter, or BTM, request for proposals. We're designing this similar to the Solar Plus program we already have implemented for residential customers. This will be for commercial and municipal customers. This would deploy solar plus battery installations and only deploy battery installations where applicable. As was just mentioned, facilities like this that already have solar would be able to take advantage of battery backup. This would enhance our peak load management, increase our resilience and grid reliability, and support overall grid health. Here's the proposed schedule for this RFP. We expect to issue it early next month, March 10th. With a deadline for submittal on April 7th to give folks an opportunity to prepare and submit the proposals. And we hope to be back to the board for a selection at the end of May in the May board meeting. As we have throughout the expansion of all our service territories, we staff continues to participate in community events and other outreach efforts. And here's a listing. I'm not going to go through all of these, of some of the things we've done recently in the month of February since our last board meeting, or sorry, actually leading up to our last board meeting. Sorry, following our last board meeting, leading up to this board meeting, my apologies. And wanted to make mention that we do have a presentation later on the agenda on battery storage, and staff and I participated in an event on Monday that dealt with battery storage safety and technological advancements, primarily as related to lithium-ion batteries. And staff also participated this week in a conference, Intersolar and Energy Storage Conference this week that was hosted in San Diego. Here are some upcoming events that staff will be participating in. Not only do we get out to conferences and meetings, but we also engage with our member chambers and our member cities, various committees and commissions to engage with them, as well as our ongoing efforts to coordinate with our member agencies, sustainability staff, and looking to further meet our respective agencies' climate action plan goals. An update on our Solar Plus that I just mentioned. This is our residential Solar Plus battery program. And here's a listing of the 12 active and 4 complete contracts as of January 22nd. And as you can see there, it's pretty well spread out across 6 of our member agencies. And right now, we're still working actively on getting our channel partners, that's other contractors, to provide services to our different language speakers, as well as our communities of concern, and providing services to facilities or roof structures that were not previously available for our program, using Tesla's contractors solely. Specifically, for example, tile roofs are a component that our channel partners can provide service to. So that concludes the CEO report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Greg. Any questions from the board? Thank you. Please, Christy.
Oh, the commercial industrial program, will that include school districts?
Municipal accounts, so yes, it will.
Wonderful.
It's in a similar question. Are there any proposed locations for the proposals?
Not at this point. When we get proposals submitted, they're depending on the proposer or the applicant. There may be some along with that. So we'll see what happens when we put out the RFP. But at this point, I will say that we have engaged with some member agencies about particular sites, but nothing specific that we're putting in the RFP.
Okay, thank you. All right. And if we would like, we can move along to, there is now available in the parking. Yes, so definitely would consider the added benefit of storage there. We could definitely use some storage here. Next, we'll have item 4, our regulatory update from our partners at Keys and Fox. Hi, welcome. Thank you.
Here, I would like to just interrupt to say that we didn't have any speakers for item number 3.
Thank you. And we'll go ahead and have your presentation and then see if there are further speakers. Thank you. Yeah, that'll come from the clerk.
Good to go. All right, thank you. Okay, so for this week's regulatory update, we're going to continue the discussion on the power charge and difference adjustment that we had last week. Bit of a primer and kind of a 201 course for last week's 101 course on how this works. This little educational segment is timely because the commission just issued a new rulemaking revising how the PCIA is going to be set. It's something that is going to become very important in the next few months and then over the next few years. All right. So as a quick reminder, the PCIA is the exit fee that's intended to ensure indifference between CEA's customers and SDG&E's customers. It manifests in that gold circle that you see up here on the screen, the PCIA revenue requirement, as either a credit or as a debit to CEA's overall portfolio costs, either increasing or decreasing the rates that your customers are going to pay. Its rate making is complicated, and that's part of the reason we're going to talk through it today. But there's really 2 big ingredients that go into the PCIA. One is looking forward, so it's the forecasted indifference amount. So the rates that will be set for next year will look forward to the forecasted costs, the forecasted revenues for SDG&E in 2026. The second piece of it is actually backward looking, and it trues up the forecast from the prior year. So it will true up the forecasted costs and revenues from 2025 with the actual costs and revenues SDG&E sees in 2025 from its portfolio. That acronym right there, the PABA, stands for the Portfolio Allocation Balancing Account. It's just an account that keeps track of whether the forecast was too high or too low in terms of the costs and the revenues. Okay, now we'll get into the nitty-gritty a little bit. While the slide is intimidating, it's some pretty simple concepts that we'll just start with. So the indifference amount is the difference between the costs and the value of SDG&E's portfolio within the market. I'll get to that bottom equation in this slide here. And then here we are. This is a more detailed version of that backwards looking component, the true up. The bottom equation right down here is really where most of the controversy lies in the PCIA. And what it does is it tries to value SDG&E's portfolio in a given year. It looks at 3 different values in that portfolio. There's the cost of the kilowatt hours, the actual energy that the generation creates. And then there's this slide, which is the renewable component. So that is the Renewable Portfolio Standard, RPS, the final RPS adder. Renewable energy in California has a higher value than non-renewable energy on account of the RPS standards, the requirements that certain percentages of the generation in the state come from renewable resources. The last piece of the value of SDG&E's portfolio is capacity. That's here in the RA adder. RA stands for resource adequacy. Capacity makes sure that there is a generator that can be flipped on in order to serve generation or to serve load whenever that load comes on. There's actually a 4th ingredient here that's not listed because it's not relevant to SDG&E, and that's GHG-free resources. Those are resources that don't produce greenhouse gases, but are not considered renewable in California. 2 examples of that are large hydro and nuclear power. SDG&E no longer has nuclear power in its portfolio. So the issue is controversial because while there is a transparent market for energy, and it's easy to figure out how much energy is worth in the market because the California Independent System Operator market tells you what it's worth. But for renewables and for capacity, there's no transparent market. That all happens bilaterally through arm's length negotiations between 2 parties. So the commission has to estimate what the value of those components are. And that estimation takes place through what's called the market price benchmark. The one for renewables is called the RPS adder. The one for capacity is called the RA adder. And it's calculated based on recently executed transactions between all of the load serving entities in California. They send their data to the commission and say, this is what we paid for this attribute. And the commission calculates these benchmarks and then lets everybody know what they are in October through the October update. Last thing I want to cover, and then we can move on, is just simply that these circles on the bottom equation, when they go up, the value of SDG&E's portfolio goes up. If the value of the portfolio goes up, the PABA balance goes down, the indifference amount goes down. That means the PCIA revenue requirement goes down. That means CEA's generation rate goes down. And so it's really important what these benchmarks end up being in terms of the PCIA rates your customers are going to pay.
Can you repeat that? The whole up and down?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. No problem. I moved quickly. Sorry. So when the value of SDG&E's portfolio goes up, then you look at the top equation. That means the year-end PABA balance will go down. I'm just going to go to the prior slide. It also means the indifference amount will go down because here are those adders again in terms of the forecasted values. And then we go back one more slide, and now we have our two ingredients for the PCI revenue requirement. Both of those would go down. That means the PCI revenue requirement goes down. And it's going back one more slide. If the PCI revenue requirement goes down, CEA's overall generation rates that you charge to your customers go down. Okay, just to make it a little more complicated for you. This is the last thing we'll drill down on. But the RA adder, the market price benchmark for capacity, actually has three different ones. And it is all tied to the three different kinds of capacity you find in California. The first is system capacity that says, do we have enough generation online in order to meet the overall system load? Then you have local. Local is similar to freeways that get congested during certain times of the day. The grid has certain parts of it that get congested when there's high load. And so you have to have enough local generation in those hard to reach pockets of the grid to make sure that you can match demand and supply at the same time. That's called local capacity. And the last is called flexible capacity. Flexible capacity is tied to the beautiful solar array outside here over the parking lot. When the sun goes down, that's going to stop producing, and all the rest of the solar in California is going to stop producing too. So you have to have very flexible generation that can quickly turn on and ramp in order to meet load between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m., which is actually when California's peak load is right now. So between those three different types of flexible capacity, system has become the most controversial and is the cause of the rulemaking that we're seeing at the Public Utilities Commission. System is this black line here. So the system benchmark has gone up significantly since 2023 to 2024 levels and then on up to 2025 levels. In terms of your PCI rates, this has been good news because PCI rates have gone down. But it made the commission nervous. And so during last year's rate-making exercise, which again is called the ERA, the Energy Resource Recovery Account proceedings, the commission delayed publication of the MPBs and then revised them twice. And both revisions decreased those MPBs, which some of the incumbent members will remember me discussing in October and November. They also issued special ALJ rulings asking for comments on whether we should delay or somehow create other mechanisms to account for those changes. We said no, and we're largely successful. So we got decision 24-12-040 that adopted this year's PCI rates with largely few things changed in terms of how the market price benchmarks would be implemented. But the commission flagged in that decision and in the other IOU's decisions that it wanted to revisit the issue of the RAMPB this year. And that came out, that was adopted on Thursday and was issued on yesterday. So I'm not going to read the goals of this rulemaking to you right now, but they are there for your review. But what this rulemaking is going to do, it's going to provide an opportunity for us to make sure that the PCIA is calculated fairly, but it's also going to provide a threat that an unfair calculation of the PCIA will result in those rates going up for CEA. The rulemaking will proceed in 2 tracks. The first is track 1, which will move very quickly. It's supposed to be completed by the end of Q2 this year, and it's only going to focus on changes to the resource adequacy market price benchmark. We received a staff proposal on that yesterday, and in all of staff's proposals, PCIA rates would have gone up and the value of the benchmarks would have gone down. So that's our near-term fight. And the long-term fight will be in track 2, where there are lingering issues that have come up during prior error forecast cases and compliance cases. The scope of track 2 is still to be determined, but the commission gave itself lots of time to decide it. They gave themselves 3 years to decide what else is going to change within the PCIA rulemaking. So lots happening in the near term on the PCIA, and then lots happening in the long term as well.
Thank you so much, Tim. I had an initial question, and I'm sure we might have questions from the board. You mentioned local procurement. Does local power procurement have any impact on PCIA rates?
It does. In terms of if CEA is doing local procurement in terms to reduce the amount that it has to procure, that would reduce rates for you all. But where local really comes in is as one of the RA adders right here in this piece of it.
Yes, I imagine so. And I also had a question about the actual cost of energy, right? So the actual cost of energy and then those recently executed agreements will determine the actual value of the utility portfolio. At what point is the actual cost of energy determined?
Yeah, so the way where's that acronym? PABA. The way the portfolio allocation balancing account works is it's ongoing. So right now, SDG&E is actually on February 20th. It's resolving its January books. So it records all the revenues it got, it records all the costs it had, and it records all of the revenues it received from generation as well. And it determines its PABA balance for that month by the 20th of the following month. And so in the energy resource recovery account case, we start to see those books. So we'll see the file in May, and when in May, we'll see January, February, March, and
Okay,
April.
so
But it's
fairly
ongoing.
immediately. Great. Any questions from the board? Thank you for walking us through these complicated steps. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Has the RA adder changed so significantly since CCAs began back in 2010? They didn't have this problem back then? Or I'm not sure I'm understanding why all these issues keep coming up in these later years.
Yeah, I mean, the PCIA and used to be called the competition transition charge after the turn of the millennium. It's all evolved over time, right? So the current version of the RA adder was adopted in October of 2018 in decision D1810-019. And what happens is the markets continue to evolve. And so we're seeing something called slice of day implemented, which is a new way of ensuring that there is enough capacity online in order to serve load. And so one of the things staff says in the report yesterday is they say lots of load serving entities are nervous about slice of day. And so they didn't sell as much RA into the market as they usually do. And they're saying that might be one of the reasons why we're seeing such high prices for RA in the market. Secondly, it's hard to procure RA these days. It's hard to build new generation in California these days. And so we have a supply crunch. There's not enough generation out there to serve what's increasing load right now. Well, if you have demand increasing and supply staying the same, economics is the price is going to go up. And that's what we're starting to see now as well.
Thank you for that question. To follow up, I see that one of the opportunities is to revise the calculation methodology. And so this is the methodology you're explaining to us now, but how would we expect it to change?
Well, the commission is really focused on this RA adder right now. And what their concern is so right now that looks back to the fourth quarter of the prior year and then the 3 first quarters of the current year. The point of that, though, is they're seeing problems that they've identified where there's affiliate transactions between 2 affiliates. There's something called sleeve transactions and other transactions that the commission is concerned, those aren't real market transactions. And by including them, it might be changing how the RA adder is calculated. And so all of the changes that they've proposed are just trying to figure out a way to more accurately represent what the actual value of capacity is, because again, we don't have a transparent market in California for capacity.
Can you explain why we don't have a transparent? I know that's probably very convoluted, but and I know these are tough questions, but
I don't know. This is my favorite thing to talk about. So we can do this all day if you want to do it. Yeah, it's a complicated question. Maybe a simple way to answer it is, as soon as you have a transparent capacity market, that's actually where things are being bought and sold like that, you tend to trigger federal jurisdiction over your electricity market. And I think there is a shyness in California about letting Washington, D.C. start to dictate how capacity is bought and sold in California. That's a piece of it. Other piece of it, it's a post-energy crisis 2000, 2001 issue that's how we get this hybrid RA market that we have right now. Lots of factors. You could teach a college course just on that question, but yeah, it's complicated.
Great. No further comments from, oh, Maria,
Sure.
please. Thank you.
That triggered a follow-up question. So considering the federal climate that we're in, are we going to be seeing some changes?
No, I don't think so. California has flirted with regionalization of the capacity markets and what that would require. We haven't seen that move forward with a lot of momentum, but I believe they're trying again. So we'll see what happens there. But that type of regionalization would trigger more federal oversight.
Thank you for that question. Want to make sure I catch everybody, and also if we have any public comment on this item.
Thank you, Chair. We do not have any public speakers, and I will note for the record that Board Member Nunez arrived at 2:11 p.m.
Thank you. And with that, we just have to receive this item. So thank you for your presentation. And we will continue to move through our agenda here. Next, we have item 5, which is an overview of battery storage systems.
Thank you, Chair, members of the CEA board. So before I introduce our speaker, let me get back to where we were. On battery energy storage, I just wanted to give a little introduction. So this is what we expect to be the first in a series of presentations on BESS, battery energy storage systems, to inform the board and provide an overview of different issues applicable to battery energy storage. It's important to know and one of the reasons we're doing so is the board may recall that at the last meeting, you did approve a term sheet for a storage facility at Camp Pendleton, a 6-megawatt facility that would provide some midterm reliability resources for us, as well as backup power to Camp Pendleton. And we're going to see more of these. And the reason we're going to see more of these is because our goals for renewable energy, both at the local level and at the state level, will depend in a major way on how to store that energy. So this will support all of our goals in that respect, as well as our individual member agencies' climate action plan goals, and also to maintain grid reliability during peak demand. The state goal right now is to achieve 100% clean energy by 2045. And it's estimated that in order to do so, we're going to need 52 gigawatts, that's 52,000 megawatts of storage capacity in the state. And to frame that in where we are today, you can see while we've advanced rapidly over the last several years, going from 770 megawatts in 2019 just to today, we have 13.3 gigawatts or 13,391 megawatts. We'll need to double that and then double that again to get to that 52,000 megawatt or 52 gigawatt capacity. So that this slide shows you where we are. We're about a quarter of a way to that goal. So that's a key reason, and it's at a very high level. And I don't know that Jason, when he comes up, will get specific into this, but we have a lot of solar in the state. We have so much solar that during the day, we have excess solar, and it either has to be sold to other states or it's curtailed. It basically isn't used. And so in order to really take advantage of that, we need to store that energy so that way it can be dispatched into the grid during, as Tim was talking about, peak demand times, 4 to 9 p.m. and other times when the sun isn't shining or wind isn't generating. So just wanted to frame that in terms of the importance of storage to everyone in the state and to us before I introduce our speaker, who is going to come and talk to you a little bit about battery energy storage, some of the issues affecting it, because we've all heard of recent fire and thermal runaway incidents at various facilities. And so I just wanted to give those just overall high level why this is important to CEA, to Southern California and California as a whole. So Jason Anderson is here today. He's the president and CEO of Clean Tech San Diego. It's a business organization in the greater San Diego area that's a global leader in the clean tech economy. They 2016 launched a program, the Southern California Energy Innovation Network, with the support of the California Energy Commission, which provides free resources for a consortium of regional partners and organizations to help generate, we'll have entrepreneurs successfully bring innovative energy products to the market. And before that, he was the Vice President of Business Development at the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation. So Jason, thank you very much. And I got to hand this off to you for being here.
Thanks, Greg, and thank you all for having me here today. Before I get started, let me just thank you all for the work you're doing. You are probably well aware that being in the energy industry is often thankless, as I think it is being a public official as well. So thank you for what you do, and to CEA staff as well. Thanks for all the work that you all are doing. It's important to help us get to our renewable energy goals, to have entities like this. So as was said, Jason Anderson, President and CEO of Clean Tech San Diego. We are a renewable energy business association. We were founded, I think 19 years ago now, when the state of California passed AB 32, our global climate change legislation that was passed under the Schwarzenegger administration. The mayor of San Diego at the time, some regional business leaders got together and created this organization in order to not only support our region's renewable energy goals, but to also create a clean tech economy here in San Diego and really think about this being another great economic pillar for our region. And knowing that this industry would not necessarily just be an environmental organization, but really an economic development organization. So what we do, we work with a number of different partners to really position our region as a leader in this space. We work with public, private, academic institutions collectively to support energy-related initiatives. What does that mean? We support all of your climate action plans and track those quite closely. We support and participate in R&D programs that are primarily being led by our academic institutions. And as Greg said, we also run the Southern California Energy Innovation Network, which is a California Energy Commission-funded accelerator program to support early-stage energy entrepreneurs in the greater San Diego region. And I'll say to you that it probably is no surprise to you that most of the entrepreneurs that we actually support and the small businesses that we support are based in North County. So hopefully that's good news to you, and I'm happy to go into that in more detail with you. We also advocate for investments by the private sector, both in projects and in our grid here in our region. So we have about 135 members that support the organization. And just to be fully transparent, some of those members include developers, renewable energy developers, including solar developers, wind generation developers, and battery storage developers. So with that, my hope is that even you knowing that, I can provide an unbiased just overview of battery energy storage systems in the region. Before I do that, let me just throw this up here real quick because I have to. This is just a quick snapshot of what our clean tech industry looks like in San Diego County. So supports about 40,000 jobs throughout the region, has about a $9.5 billion impact on our regional economy. To put that in perspective, I believe the life sciences industry here is like $145 billion impact. So a small fraction of that, but nonetheless, one that I think is important. And we've been doing these economic impact studies for the last, I think, 11 or 12 years. And fortunately, we've seen the industry grow year over year. And I'm hopeful that continues to be the case. So what I wanted to cover today is just a brief overview of battery energy storage systems, why I think these systems are important and necessary, the investments being made, not only in the technology of these that is being used in these systems, but also the design of the systems, a brief overview, and I think probably which is the most important thing, of the safety codes and standards that regulate these projects, and then some insight into just local best projects that are here in the region and some public opinions that we've been doing. Before I get there, just again, to be fully aware of what's happening in our region and put this conversation into context, I think this is why we're having these discussions. Obviously, recent issues on some projects that are driving a lot of concern around battery energy storage projects, really both here locally, but also at the state level and even at the national level. And you all, and the general public, I think has every right to be concerned. But I also hope that we can start to be more properly informed. I think it's also worth noting the incidents that have happened here in our region were legacy projects that were built early on. And so were designed and built under a totally different standard of codes that we have today. And I'll get into that soon. And just to stay on this topic really quick, studies are showing that as we continue to see an increase in battery storage deployment, we're also seeing a significant decrease in incidents, primarily due to the fact that codes and standards has evolved, as has project design and the technologies being used. And so just real quick, we've all paid attention, but why here in San Diego and why have we had 3 pretty large incidents here recently? Again, it's because this region has been a long-term adopter of renewable energy, and we were really meeting our PS goals early on. And so because of that, we built a lot of battery storage projects before a lot of other regions throughout the state. And in fact, one of the projects here, when it was built, I believe it was around 2011 or so, it was the largest battery storage project in the world. So I'm definitely not trying to obviously diminish the concerns of fires, but just want to acknowledge that we have some legacy systems here in the county, and that we are improving the regulations, the standards, et cetera, under which those projects are built. All right, so it may seem a little backward, but I just wanted to kind of lay all that out there before we move into it, because I kind of feel like it's the elephant in the room to some degree or not. So what are these systems? What are battery energy storage systems? I think they're exactly what you think they are. They're a series of batteries, no different than these things, that can store energy and use that energy later. In the renewable energy industry in particular, they are the fastest growing and most evolving technology in the industry. And in fact, back in the day when we were building a lot of solar and wind generation here in the state and even beyond California, batteries were always kind of considered the holy grail. And we've reached that point today. They have a number of use cases here locally, as Greg alluded to, most effective at storing the abundant amount of solar energy we generate during the day so that we can use it when the sun isn't shining and when energy is more expensive. At scale, they have prevented major blackouts here locally and throughout the state. And as, again, Greg said, a key part of keeping our grid resilient. So I think for the context of this conversation and kind of the work that you all do and are already doing, batteries can be broken down into really 3 different components or 3 different types of projects. We've got smaller systems, those that are typically found in residences and commercial properties, utility scale projects that are usually 10 megawatts and above, that can typically provide 4+ hours of energy, and then long duration projects that typically store greater than 8 hours of energy, which I believe is what you're looking at up in Camp Pendleton. Is that correct? But most of, I think, what we're talking about and kind of what folks are talking about right now are really those utility scale projects that are usually 4 hours and above. So Greg talked a little bit about this. I won't go into too much details, but obviously a number of benefits for these types of systems. Again, I'm more focused on the utility scale projects at this point, but providing backup power, making the grid more resilient, helping manage energy costs by storing cheaper/solar energy, and supporting increased adoption and use of renewable energy, and obviously helping us meet our climate and energy goals. And here in California, again, Greg alluded to this, but this is important as we work to reach our renewable energy goals. I won't be repetitive, but again, we've got 13,000 on the grid right now. We've got to get to 52,000 to meet our goals. And this isn't just important to the state. It's important to us. It's important to the cities that you represent, and which I assume is part of the reason why your cities opted into Clean Energy Alliance. And so for that, I think it's important to know that as CCAs and CEA has obligations around midterm reliability, resource adequacy, IRPs, et cetera, batteries play a pretty critical role in helping you meet those obligations. So going back to the system specifically and how they are advancing, excuse me, and I'll focus on safety updates on the next slide. But I will say today, and I'm confident in saying that battery storage projects are built with the latest technology and safety advancements, high energy monitoring protocols in place, really to make sure they pose very little risk to surrounding areas. It's also worth noting EPRI and other agencies have studies that any sort of incident that has happened at a battery storage project has not gone beyond the property of that particular project. So projects today are built using containerized solutions as opposed to indoor installations, and they're designed so that should an incident occur, it's limited to the container in which it started. And kind of just to reference that, the fire, the incident up in Escondido, I don't remember what month that was, but was a containerized system that contained itself to that one particular container. In addition, the chemistry inside the batteries is also evolving. And just to kind of go back to some of the R&D work that's happening here locally, there's actually a lot of interesting work happening at the Center for Energy Research, which is a lab on campus at UC San Diego, really starting to think about new chemistries inside of batteries. So a little bit long-term out, but I think there's some interesting and exciting work happening in our region. From a safety and codes perspective, as I noted, the industry has to follow a robust set of national and safety codes to guide planning, development, operating of these projects. You've probably heard, and you'll continue to hear reference to NFPA 855 and UL 954A. And what those are regulations that design or that regulate the design and installation and operation of projects and the maintenance of those projects, but how also fire projects are tested for fire safety. And I think as part of some of the ongoing presentations you'll receive, you'll probably start to get a little bit more in those weeds of these codes and standards and what they mean. California's own fire code, which is based on national code and standards, actually references both NFPA 855 and UL 954A. Do you have a question?
This is
I-
a robust item, so I'm sure we
Yeah.
have questions on codes.
Sorry. Yeah. And can I just say that I'm not a code expert, and this is as complicated to me as it is to you. And I was part of the meeting that Greg was at on Monday, but and I'm happy to share information that if I don't have the answers.
No, and this is really helpful. My question in looking and thinking through, since you mentioned national, one of the questions that I'm thinking through and that I have is considering the climate that we're in with what's happening at the federal level. For me, when I hear the word national, I'm thinking through the regulations that we see here. Are these under what agency, and what does that look like? And are these regulations going to be gone tomorrow? That's what I'm.
No, these are governed by international fire codes, so much different than they're not a national or a national agency. They're codes and standards that are created and adopted by kind of industry. So my understanding is those.
And understand that for me, it's more. of
Yeah.
a-
I'm trying to think of
thinking through, but since we don't know if we're going to have an EPA, we don't know if we're going to have some sort of energy. And so-
Right.
So for me, I just don't have that context. So my apologies, but it's not clear to me what the regulations look at the national level and really how that impacts us
Thank you,
here.
board member. I had the same question. What agency is responsible for these standards?
Yeah, so the NFPA, National Fire Prevention Association, the regulation that you're looking at now, the 855, so they develop these standards. It's much like, put my old land use building code hat on for a second. It's much like the international code International Conference Code for Building Codes adopts these standards, and then every agency throughout the state is then required at the local level to adopt these standards. Usually what happens is they get sent to the state adopts them as well, and if a local agency doesn't adopt them, they're adopted by default because they're that important. In terms of the National Fire Prevention Association and its relationship to the federal government, that agency will continue, at least in my estimation, to continue to do this work and update their codes. It was most recently updated, I believe, in 2023. So I don't see anything happening at the federal level as impacting this kind of work. These standards are going to be implemented, adopted locally. And so right now, virtually every agency in the state fire code has implemented NFPA 855 by reference or directly. And then local agencies can even choose to adopt more strict regulations, not less strict, much like building codes. So that's the typical high-level process by which the codes are adopted locally, but each of your member agencies by default or by explicit action have adopted the updated building and fire codes.
Thank you for that context. That's
Yeah,
very
and
helpful for me.
I was just trying to figure out a way to appropriately respond to that without putting any sort of personal bias in there. But I think, I have heard that I have not heard of any kind of threat to these codes or the adoption of these codes at the national level, kind of given the political environment that we're in right now, if that's helpful.
Thank you. And if we're on this slide, right, and before we continue, it sounds like the California Fire Code will allow us to adopt those federal standards and perhaps expand them.
Yes, and even go above those should they choose. And California, because we're California actually goes a little bit above the International Fire Code. And so a lot of what has happened at the national level, California takes a little bit step further. But as it relates to these projects in particular today, they reference both NFPA 855 and UL 9540A.
Perfect. Thank you.
And so just to go to Greg's point too, there is process right now and conversations that are going to update these codes to make sure they're evolving as the technology evolves. And so there's committees at the national level. Again, I don't think they're governed by an agency that is working on the update of these codes to make sure that as the industry advances, the codes are advancing to keep track of that. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think part of my concern, part of the question that I'm trying to reconcile, I think, is because we are hearing about the challenges that we're expecting from the Trump administration, right, to some of these standards that we have that are higher standards in our state. That's what I'm thinking through, what possibly that's going to look like for us.
And my understanding is that it's an independent agency that's not that there's no oversight or governance by the federal government. And I will verify that. But in conversations we have had, which have been lengthy on this topic, there hasn't been any sort of threat, I would say, of the undoing at the federal level of some of these codes.
I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
And again, I think this is where there's a lot of information to be shared and kind of education, especially on the codes and standards. So we, as Greg noted, we were in a meeting on Monday that went pretty deep into this. I wish I understood it all because it's complicated and there's a lot of acronyms, but we have access to resources that we can share with you, your staff, et cetera, on just continuing to update yourself on how these codes are advancing to make sure these projects are built as safe as possible. I will say too, the fire code in and of itself and the local fire jurisdictions that have quite a lot of permitting authority over these projects, and I know you'll be hearing from some of them at a future meeting, are very well apprised of these updates and how they're implementing them locally.
We'll take one more question here with
So
Rebecca.
what about the legacy projects that you talked about? Is there any need or is there any interest in going back and looking at those? And it just seems like there's only a matter of time that some of those or more of those are going to,
Yeah, so that is a conversation that's happening at the state level right now. So the governor's office has convened a working group, a safety working group, primarily comprised of the CPUC, the Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission, the Air Resources Board, and a number of different agencies. I think they just had their meeting earlier this month, their first meeting earlier this month. Part of the conversation and what they're trying to figure out is doing a survey of all the legacy systems in California, and what type of upgrades could be made
Bring
to
them up
those
to code.
systems. If it's not necessarily to bring them up to code, it may be that, providing hazard mitigation analysis on those projects and some of the other things, making sure the first responders are aware of those projects. But that's work that's being done at the state level right now. And it's still kind of TBD on what that's going to look like.
I think that would bring some comfort level to a lot of people that, like you said, this is complicated stuff, but just bringing that awareness that, we've looked at these and moving forward, it's very different and all that kind of stuff. Because this, again, you said the battery storage is just, it's necessary. We're doing it. We need it. There's no question. So we just need to make sure that everybody understands and is coming along with us.
I agree. All right, so just touching on real quick, and I referenced some of these, but best practices, as it relates to projects specifically, developers of these projects are now required to incorporate a number of different best practices into those projects. So this is hazard mitigation analysis, battery management systems, emergency shutdown, gas detection, et cetera. So a lot of these things, especially here locally, these practices are actually required by the local permitting jurisdictions, which is not only the public agencies, but also city or public safety officials as well. And I will say, and I've seen, fire safety experts and developers are probably working more closely now than they ever have on these projects. So there's a great deal, I think, of training, communication, information sharing, planning, et cetera, that's happening as it relates to these projects. And again, I think if I understand, CEA is lining up some other presentations to go a little bit deeper into what that looks like here locally. And then just to kind of give you a snapshot, and I can't see this, and I don't know if you can, but just here in San Diego County, there are significant amounts of battery storage installation. What this slide shows is that most of those installations are at the residential level. So about 23,000 installations, about 400 commercial installations, and just about 20 utility scale installations. So this goes back to, I think, the point you made around legacy systems, but this also doesn't include proposed projects or projects that are currently under development. And then I'll close by saying, obviously there's opposition to the projects. We actually commissioned a third party recently just to better understand public sentiment in San Diego County around battery storage projects. We found that 71% of residents support battery storage projects, 57% support those projects in their neighborhoods. Just good data for us to have as we kind of move forward, but I think there still is a lot of education that needs to happen. And so we're working steadily towards that. So again, hopefully this is helpful. There's, definitely can follow up on some of the updates and standards that are happening out there. I definitely want to understand if there is a federal risk to that. I don't think so, and I hope not, but I'll look into that. But happy to answer any questions, and thanks for having me here today.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate the presentation. And before we go to member comments and questions, I want to see if there's any public speakers at this time.
We do not have any speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, great background. Any comments? I'd love to hear from the board. Yes, Vice Chair.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. This is really informative. So I represent Escondido, and as you mentioned, there was a fire in September that had a lot of people quite nervous, quite worried. We did a moratorium to seize or to stop any type of further battery storage in Escondido until we could create some policies and create some technology, or assure that the technology is there that would make people feel safe. So I do have a couple of questions. Can you go back to the slide with the jobs and everything? I want to start there. Employment, that one right there. So we're looking at clean tech jobs. How many of those are permanent jobs and not just temporary jobs for construction?
So these are all permanent jobs, and this doesn't take into account the temporary construction that you're kind of referring to, probably as it relates to individual projects. These are all permanent jobs in the region. And then just to kind of build on that a second, the majority of the jobs in the sector, probably no surprise, are solar installers.
That's right. So how many of them would be, let's say, battery storage jobs?
I don't have that data in my mind. I can definitely look at that.
Yeah.
And I think if you're differentiating between kind of on-site construction jobs versus permanent jobs on sites, I don't have those numbers on the top of my head.
Now, I know those numbers are, I know that the battery storage, for example, was, the one that they were proposing was less than a dozen permanent jobs, the one that was being proposed in Escondido. So that is a significant concern that a lot of my constituents have, that we have, is we're taking up land space that could potentially be used for more permanent jobs. So I just want, I'm not, I guess I just want to bring that to the forefront because that is a concern that a lot of people, especially for us, where it doesn't, these types of projects don't match our economic development goals in Escondido. So I do want to mention that. So speaking of which, we're looking at the land use and the space for this. The space that we're using, is it arable land? I mean, what other options are there? Is this space that could be used for development, for housing, for even middle income or low income housing? What space are we really targeting, and can it be used for other things?
So right now, and I don't know all the zoning requirements for the city of Escondido in particular, but I will say battery storage projects in general, again, the utility scale, the larger ones are restricted to industrial zoned land.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So when we're looking at the ignitions, I know you're saying, we've talked about how the technology has improved. How many ignition incidents are there per million, I would say? Like if we're looking at, lithium batteries, how often are they likely to ignite? And I know that, you're talking about how they're contained. The reason why this is important is because they essentially burn indefinitely until it burns out its own fuel source. Is that correct? It doesn't need oxygen. It doesn't need anything like the standard fire would.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So how often do they catch on fire now? A lithium battery, let's say per 1 million.
Yeah, so I don't know that I have that information on top of me. I'll just point to this and just at least kind of for reference say that as we're seeing more and more installations, the incidents are going down because of the codes and standards that are being adopted. I do know that fire personnel in the region are tracking that a little bit closer than I am. So when that presentation comes before you, I know they'll have that information for you and they can look at that. And there's reports out there that have been done really showing kind of the amount of projects, the incidents, the length of those incidents, et cetera. And it's dependent upon the way the project was built. And then obviously, a variety of factors that go into that.
Do these legacy projects here, are they more likely to have thermal runoffs?
It's hard to say, honestly.
Okay.
They're older, again, built under different codes and standards. So it's hard for me to say that, but I would assume compared to new systems, there is a higher probability, but I think that probability is still very low.
Yeah, if I could just interject. So part of the discussion, we hope to have experts come and talk specifically to this, but the legacy systems, there's two different types of lithium ion. There's lithium ion that's made with nickel, manganese, cobalt, or NMC. The state of the art right now is lithium ion phosphate, which has a much higher thermal runaway trigger point. That's really high level. So the quick answer is yes, the legacy systems are more subject to thermal runaway. But what we're not going to run away from is that regardless of that technology, the lithium ion batteries can be pushed to thermal runaway. And part of that UL standard that batteries have to subject themselves to is actually to test those batteries and actually drive them to thermal runaway to see how they behave. The other thing about some of these systems, at least the Moss Landing project and the Otay Mesa project, Moss Landing was particularly unique in as much as they took a building that used to have older style turbines in the building and fill that building, one single building, with these batteries. You'll never see that today. That's not something people would do. And in the Otay Mesa, it was also a single building facility, but it was built expressly for batteries. So it was built for that purpose. So it was a sort of a generational shift. And so as we move forward, technologies are advancing even with lithium ion. So I would say that in the current state of the market, these newer batteries would be less subject to it, but no one will ever tell you that they're not subject to thermal runaway.
Well, and to your point, what you just said, and that was, I think my colleague was mentioning that before, it was regarding I would like to see, I mean, if there's some kind of way to advocate or even get an update on how are we updating the legacy systems? Because if we have these systems that are not being updated as aggressively as possible, there's going to be significant pushback from the community. I mean, you know, I'm sorry you weren't, maybe my colleague here was there, but in Escondido, it was extremely frightening to the people in the area within the 2-3 mile radius. So I think having that kind of peace of mind would be really significant, I think, with a lot of people. And then my last thing is, you know, I think it's really significant as we're looking at BESS sites, the collaboration with cities, I think, is quintessential, because what we're seeing is we're seeing these developers, we're seeing counties, we're seeing the state trying to force their way into cities or neighboring cities without collaboration. And it really undermines the authority of fire, police, the community, councils, you know, the city essentially. And it causes a lot of political and social pushback that I don't think is necessary, especially if we could just have that collaboration.
I agree with that 100%.
Okay.
And I would say just real quick on the legacy systems, I think it's going to be interesting to watch how the state, how the CPUC, the CEC, those regulatory agencies handle that issue. And again, that's just kind of kicking off now. So I know Greg and I have talked about that, but I think kind of staying in tune with that process will be important.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you so much for this. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to share, my agreement about updating legacy systems. And I also think that I would like to learn more about the enforcement of these codes, right? And, how we're auditing our systems. I'm sure that there are a lot of updates that could be made to make these facilities more fire safe, the existing ones now, so that we can build that public trust. And ultimately, as much as we can't guarantee that we're never going to have an incident, reducing that possibility of having an incident as much as possible. There are, for me, I do take a public health perspective. There are public health implications to fires. And so that's something that I'm going to be very, concerned about. But I do think that this type of opportunity fits into our environmental goals and our economic goals. And we were just hearing that we have the potential of, reducing our PCIA, burden with the procurement of local energy. And we want to be able to provide, regular service, and battery is going to become more and more essential for that. So whatever we can do. And in this presentation, I appreciate you didn't get too much into the nitty gritty of the different technologies, because it sounds like it's continuing to evolve. And, I was surprised in this discussion to realize that really our opportunity here is about the policies, right? And potentially how we're going to be advocating for the right codes and enforcing the right codes so that we can have successful partnerships, right? I know in the city of Vista, we have a lot of land use opportunities. We do have storage or battery, solar that was just finished being installed. And at the time, we hadn't considered storage, right? But that's something that we could consider. We have, different parcels of public land that we have considered using for public housing. We are developing our recreational spaces, but I think that there's a benefit to having this type of amenity available, just a technology that is going to help us become more energy resilient in the long term. But I do have concerns about the continued incidents, right? And it sounds like they're from kind of like these legacy projects, right? Where, okay, what can we do to intervene before this continues to happen? And then move forward with projects using more trusted technology. So I know that that would be probably the best way forward. Are there any other comments this way? Yes, Councilmember.
Councilmember Jimmy Figueroa from Oceanside. With the legacy projects, what are the different agencies that oversee these legacy projects throughout the county?
So right now, in terms of it, it's the owner operator in the city in which, or the region in which it was permitted. But kind of, I think, who's overseeing it right now, and will probably provide that, whatever the directive is for those systems will probably be at the state level, again, whether it be the CPUC, the CEC, or from the governor's office.
So just from my understanding, each individual is responsible for providing oversight to the regulations and way that in which they're being operated in and maintained?
Well, the cities right now, you have your zoning requirements that the project has to go through that permitting process, right? And oftentimes, most of it kind of comes down to fire safety or fire code. That's which a lot of this is regulated by. So I think that update from the fire officials will give you a little bit more insight into that. But as it relates to kind of the future or the directives of legacy projects, again, I think that's something that's really being discussed more at the state level right now.
Thank you.
Councilmember?
Thank you, Chair. Um, I, I agree with what my colleagues have shared so far with the concerns and with the importance, right, of moving forward with some of these projects, but the hesitation. And so I agree that the education is critical. If we can go back to the study that you mentioned at the end of, I have some questions about it. And I'm definitely interested in following that thread because I think without the education, I think it's going to be really difficult for all of us to move forward. And so I think that is a critical piece. Unfortunately, I don't really have a baseline really of what the level of knowledge, really honestly, even in my own community. And I think it's really deficient. I think it is really complicated. So I'm trying to figure out sort of where we're at. So the study that you mentioned, who were the individuals that participated?
Yeah, so that was so that we're just kind of wrapping that up now. So I have kind of
Okay.
what I have, but we'll go public with it eventually.
Okay.
But it was,
Can we do a follow-up?
yeah, for sure. And
I'm very interested.
100%.
Like I said, I honestly do not have a baseline because I think it is really complicated. I've worked in other communities. Like for instance, I've spent a lot of time in the Imperial Valley with the lithium and just trying to engage the community at all levels. And I just know that it requires a lot of work,
Yep.
a lot of hands-on, and these are really sophisticated concepts. And so for me, it's really how do we digest all of this so that a normal person like me can understand? And so I guess my question is sort of who's doing that and how are we all going to come together to make sure that that does happen so that we have some sort of baseline?
Yeah, and that's part of the work. And again, this is just, two parts of I think an 80 question survey that was conducted with around, I think, 1,000 people or so. So you all are familiar with polling and it's very similar to that, right? And the information in it is interesting. The way the questions were asked were, I like to say, like idiots like me can understand. So we tried to make it to where it was not technical in nature. And so it gave us a better kind of response. But part of this and part of why we did this, and I have to say I'm a little surprised by the results, but part of why we did this is so that we can start to really launch this kind of this public awareness campaign around these issues. Very similar things were done when solar first started hitting all the roofs in San Diego and throughout the country. And very similar things were done when EVs started taking over the roadways. Really, concerted efforts to update and just inform the general public. So part of what we want to do with this, and this was kind of just a baseline understanding of where people are on these issues, is that so when we start to really think about how do we educate the public, we can meet them where they are in terms of their knowledge and help them really understand not just the importance of the projects for environmental reasons, whatever it may be, but also the technology, the safety, all that kind of stuff. So it's part of a bigger, I think, picture than, just these two kind of slides can show, but something we definitely are doing. And I would be more than happy once the survey's kind of official and synthesized and all that stuff to come back and go through that with you or individually go through, each of the 80 questions and kind of lay it out for you in terms of what we found.
I would definitely want to see that and really, I think that would help me to understand sort of where we're at and really what level of education we need to engage
Yeah.
collectively, I think. Um, if we can go back to the slide where you had the dots, yes, the other one that you just, this one.
Yeah.
Um, I think this is actually really helpful for me. And what I'm wondering, is there somewhere where I would be able to find this map so that I can pull up to see where some of these projects are physically located?
Yeah, so
I'm
this
really
is,
visual, and I think for me, this is something that at least for a normal person, if they could see, okay, this has worked out well for this business, for this.
yeah, so this is information that is housed at the California Energy Commission. I can send the link to where that, and you can go in and sort the data with a number of different parameters. Obviously, I did the county just to give a perspective there, but you can drill in a little bit deeper. I don't know if it goes down to the zip code level or the neighborhood level. I was just kind of focused on the regional level, but I can send that link to the staff and they can disseminate it as appropriate.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, any comments from member? No? Okay. I really appreciate this dialogue and thank you, Jason, for, giving us an introduction and not shying away from the difficult parts of the conversation. Sometimes when I look at opportunities, I'm excited about them, but I have to also be briefed on what are the challenges. And I appreciate the opportunity to review the survey further as well, because we can be conducting our own kind of community outreach, right? And potentially being able to work together, right, on informing the public on what these services are possible if we have battery storage available. So I really appreciate you coming in and being willing to educate us a little bit more and inform us on where things are moving. And as a board, we will absolutely have opportunities to pursue this type of development in each of our communities and as a region and as an agency. And I absolutely believe that there's a path forward for us to do that in a way that is safe and sustainable and really coincides all of our goals together. So if there are no further, oh, yes, Member Figueroa.
Thank you so much. Just curious, because we are in Vista and I see Vista's number 3,92083 on the total capacity, what contributes to that?
Tell me, you're at the 60,000 there, correct? Kilowatts. I mean, it's obviously project-based. It looks like those are utility scale project-based in Vista. I don't know those projects in particular, but I can get that information for you.
Thank you.
Maybe I can reach out and we can see if we can get a tour, right? Take a look. I'm not
great.
super familiar with those projects, but if they're a good example, right, maybe we can continue to move forward with a similar project. All right, thank you so much.
Appreciate the to-do
Jason.
list.
I appreciate it. All right, and without any further comments, we'll go ahead and receive that update. And next, I believe we have one more presentation. We have a financial review year-to-date through December 2024 and forecast through June 2025. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Andy Stern. I'm the CFO and treasurer. We wanted to give you a mid-year update on where we are financially. The first part of this is through the first half of the year. We're on a June 30th fiscal year, similar to maybe same as all of your cities. Through December, the first slide here is through December, first 6 months. The left column is actual and the next column is budget year to date through the first 6 months. And then the next column after that is the variance. I'll direct your attention to the change in net position, which is $45 million positive for the first 6 months. Our budget for that same period was just under 31 million. And we're $15 million above, better than budget for the year. That's split evenly through revenues being a little higher than expected or budgeted. That's $8 million at the top. And then energy expenses, about $6.5 million below expenses. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But before I do that, I wanted to direct your attention to the bottom. The beginning net position at the beginning of the fiscal year was a negative, almost $17 million. That's not a good place to be. We have significantly improved that, so we're at our ending net position as of December 31 is $28 million. Let me just go to the next slide, and then I'll come back to that if you want to. So revenues are $8 million, which are 4% higher than budget for the first 6 months. Usage overall was 2% lower, but it was 4% higher during the peak months of July through September, when customer rates are higher than they are in the November, December timeframe. So that contributed to the revenues being higher than budget. Expenses were 4% below budget. Energy costs were lower than budgeted. Non-energy costs were 4% above, but non-energy costs represent only about 3% of the total budget. And the difference is probably mostly related to timing, and they don't have that much impact. And then I mentioned that the change in net position of 45+ million is $14 million better than the budget of $31 million for the first half of the year. Any questions before I go to the full year?
I think you can keep moving forward.
Okay. This is a picture of the full year. So the full year is slightly lower at projected at $40 million. This is our projected through June 30th full fiscal year. The full year budget is $33 million. Typically, the first 6 months of our year are better or more positive than the next 6 months, and that's largely because of the June, July, August, September, October months are much higher revenue rates, customer rates. But our projection for the end of the year is to be $7 million better than budget. You can see that our revenues at this point, which is near the top, is projected to be just a little bit above budget. We don't know how revenues typically play out, but they typically are within a few percent of where we would forecast. And the total cost of energy is expected to be a little bit below or $5 million favorable. So $312 million versus $317 budgeted for the full year. We could end up being slightly more positive or under than that because we, as you may remember, our budget includes energy costs are quite volatile or can be volatile, and we built in a 5% contingency for the year, and we eliminate that contingency on a month-by-month basis, but we still have the 5% contingency for the remaining 6 months of the year. So there's still some contingency built into that. So we could end up being more favorable than this. A little bit of context, which I probably already have covered, but revenues are expected to be a little bit higher, 4% higher than budget for the full year. Expenses expected to be fairly close to budget for the last half of the year, and the change in net position of $40 million or $7 million better. And I mentioned this last bullet point of we're typically less favorable in the second half of the year, although we could be better with some, because some conservatism is built into that forecast. Questions?
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the update. Sounds like things are looking good for the most part. I was just wondering, maybe this is a great question, but with revenues being higher, it sounds like there's even more demand during those peak months. You know, if that continues to be a trend, at what point would we go back and kind of look at our, you know, not our rates, but our anticipated use, right? Because the use is going up during those more hot months, it seems like. And I mean, we're able to have higher revenues, but, you know, we might not anticipate that always, but it could be something that continues to rise during those peak months.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a little bit tricky to answer that, of course. During peak demand, usually in the summer months, obviously the revenues are going to go up, and we'll see that, and we have seen that in the first half of this year. How we can address that, typically, there's a number of ways, but keeping in mind that when we do address that, if we're successful, that doesn't impact the bottom line. And some of the ways we're looking at doing that are demand response programs, like the Peak Smart program you just approved at the last meeting. I don't know what the uptake will be on something like that, but educating the public about their time of use rates, which many people are quite familiar with that, and they adjust their behavior to avoid that 4 to 9 p.m. peak demand time. And then also just programs like we're rolling out the Solar Plus program for residential uses, as well as the C&I, the commercial and industrial battery plus solar can help us with our demand during peak times of year and in the summer months. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question you had, but we work with our consultants, our energy consultants, to monitor our load forecast, to make sure that we are buying energy to suit our load. And that's a mathematical equation that sometimes goes well, sometimes not so well, like last year when we had not only exceedingly high prices for both regular energy and renewable, but we also had a load forecast that missed our targets by quite a bit. So we overprocured during a high cost of energy year. So we're constantly monitoring that. I know Andy and Dan, our procurement manager, have worked closely with PEA to make sure, and TEA to make sure that we're buying energy to meet our forecasted demand. So again, a long way to answer a question that I'm not sure I did really well, but
Appreciate it. No, so you did answer my question that we see that the usage goes up, but we're not rushing to increase our load in anticipation of the potential overbuying.
that's true. But keep in mind, and I'll let Andy, part of what our obligation is to buy resource adequacy for those months. And that cost of resource adequacy, not surprisingly, is more expensive in the summer months. So we are required to have a planning reserve margin of 17% right now, above what our peak demand times are. So we already have to do that. So think of resource adequacy as that extra additional energy to keep the lights on, so to speak, at a peak demand time. But we're managing those costs and constantly in the market to make sure that we're meeting those obligations.
Absolutely. And Andy, any thoughts on responding to higher usage?
Yeah, I don't think we should rush to any conclusions at this point. Forecasts and budget are based upon weather forecasts and weather normalized forecasts, and sometimes they can be hotter for an extra week or an extra few weeks or something in a particular month or year, or cooler. And 4% is not dramatic that we should be doing anything different at this point. Also, the impact to typically more usage and hotter months is typically higher costs, which can impact our financial position. But we also are buying energy well in advance, buying hedges and resource adequacy well in advance, and renewable energy well in advance, so that we typically can mitigate some of those price spikes that happen, even if revenues are a little higher, and they were a little bit lower in the second quarter of the first half of the year. So it's hard to predict, but 4% isn't a reason to rush to do anything different at this point.
Sure.
The next slide is a kind of a look at least through our forecast through the end of December 31, which is the end of this calendar year. And this is a look at our JP Morgan credit line requirements, where we have to meet debt service coverage ratio, which is kind of an income statement measurement, and our days liquidity on hand, which is a cash position statement. And the metrics they have in place for us to meet are 1.0 and 45. And the debt service coverage ratio, our projections are that we'll be at 12 to 16 to growing to 60 by the end of the year, based upon where we are in our current forecasts of expenses and load. And so 3 to 4% is not going to typically put us in any kind of a bad place. And our cash position or liquidity position is growing nicely over the next year. We won't quite be at a place where we can go out for an investment grade credit rating, but we're starting to close in on that, and we anticipate starting to have those discussions with credit agencies later this year. And once we can get a credit rating, that'll help us in terms of additional cash position because it'll minimize how much we have to make deposits with suppliers and also potentially improve our negotiating position with other suppliers as well.
Thank you. Anything further on the presentation? Any further questions? Thank you so much for those updates, and we'll check to see if we have any public speakers on this item.
Thank
I-
you, Chair. We do not have any speakers.
All right.
One more slide.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just where we're heading from here.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about this.
Next steps.
And we do have our budget time period coming up. The main meeting, we will present a draft budget for your review and go through a great deal more detail than this high-level presentation that we just showed you at this meeting. And then on June 26th, and then we'll take any comments or input from that draft review meeting and present a final budget for review at the June 26th meeting.
Wonderful. That sounds great. Thank you. We'll go ahead and receive that item. Appreciate that. And now we'll have any board member requests for future agenda items. Any thoughts? All right, we'll keep at it. Our next meeting will be on March 27th, City of Oceanside. And for now, we are adjourned. Thank you.